Anthony Trollope was one of the great Victorian novelists. In his lifetime, Trollope rivaled Charles Dickens. While Trollope may not be as recognizable as the man who brought forth immortal characters like Scrooge, Pip, and David Copperfield, he does remain a fixture in English literary circles and remains widely read, at least among Victorian literary aficionados. A friend of mine, as we had lunch and I brought up Trollope, informed me that he had read him as a freshman in university. Yet Trollope's works are just as deep, if not deeper, and every bit as eternal as his more famous compatriot, Charles Dickens. The Chronicles of Barsetshire include 6 of his most successful novels, set in a fictional westerly county, remarkable for the beauty of its cathedral and the antiquity of its monuments, more than for any commercial prosperity. The Warden, one of those novels, transports us to this county of Old England, Little England, where we are soon caught up in the maelstrom of church politics, media frenzy, and overzealous reformers. The Reverend Septimus Harding is a kind English gentleman cleric, the spitting image of what you would think of a 19th century kind, gentle Victorian gentleman. He is a lover of music, a precentor, and more recently, the new warden of a hospital that serves the working poor. We also meet his loving and devoted daughter, Eleanor, who is yet to be married, as so many of the great female characters are of Regency and Victorian-era literature. We also meet the disguised Jacobin next door, the revolutionary clothed in the veil of reform, the obnoxious surgeon, and humorously titled Mr. Bold. Trollope packs so much into his small novel of just over 200 pages, at least in the edition that I own. Morality, righteous sentimentality, and the politics of zealous reform all intertwine in the perfect storm that leaves the reader adrift in the same storm of emotion, moral outrage, and sympathy, and character assassination that you might find in a contemporary work of art. In the midst of this storm are the issues of duty, loyalty, and the famous private-public distinction, as well, of course, love. Mr. Harding is a man who is quiet and doesn't step on anyone's toes. He's well respected in the community. He is the upstanding English gentleman. But Mr. Harding, as Trollope earlier informed us about the financial situation of the city of Barchester, never exactly made much money. Not that money was ever much a concern for him. When the previous philanthropist of Hiram Hospital, an ancient institution founded in the 15th century, dies, leaving Mr. Harding a considerable income, at least all things considered, in his role as hospital warden. The politics of righteous indignation, investigation, and media denunciation begins. Mr. Harding's peaceful and tranquil life is disturbed by the very man whom his daughter is planning to marry. Much concern this is. If Mr. Harding is the quintessential quiet and polite English gentleman, then Mr. Bold is the obnoxious and upstart bourgeois radical. He is a surgeon. He also belongs to the newly ascendant but little respected middle class in English society. Trollope gives us no illusions that this middle-class reformer is nothing short of a revolutionary when he is described as being as zealous as Danton and the French Jacobins. Quote, "John Bold is a clever man, and would, with patience, be a clever surgeon, but he has got quite into another line of life. Having enough to live on, he has not been forced to work for bread. He has declined to subject himself to what he calls the drudgery of the profession, by which, I believe, he means the general work of a practicing surgeon, and has found other employment. He frequently binds up the bruises and sets the limbs of such of the poorer classes as he professes his way of thinking, but this he does for love. Now, I will not say that the Archdeacon is strictly correct in stigmatizing John Bold as a demagogue, for I hardly know how extreme must be a man's opinions before he can be justly so called. But Bold is a strong reformer. His passion is the reform of all abuses, state abuses, church abuses, corporation abuses. He has got himself elected a town councillor of Barchester, and has so worried 3 consecutive mayors that it became somewhat difficult to find a 4th. Abuses in medical practice and general abuses in the world at large. Bold is thoroughly sincere in his patriotic endeavors to mend mankind, and there is something to be admired in the energy with which he devotes himself to remedying evil and stopping injustice. But I fear that he is too much imbued with the idea that he has real mission for reforming. It would be well if one so young had a little more diffidence in him, and more trust in the honest purpose of others. If he could be brought to believe that old customs need not necessarily be evil, and that changes may possibly be dangerous, but no, Bold has all the ardor and all the self-assurances of a Danton, and hurls his anathemas against time-honored practices with the violence of a French Jacobin. This description of Mr. Bold is quintessentially Trollope. He is being ironical, he is being satirical, and at the end we finally see the character for what he is. He is filled with all the ardor and the self-assurances of a Danton, and he hurls his anathemas against time-honored practices with the violence of a French Jacobin. Mr. Bold, the young upstart surgeon and town councillor, begins his investigation into the supposed financial abuses of the hospital by pinpointing his prospective father-in-law as the man of gross violent negligence. In doing so, he blurs the line between what should be a private endeavor and what should be public. Mr. Bold insists that since Mr. Harding is a public servant, and that all of his actions should be subject to public scrutiny and justice, Mr. Bold is fine in trying to smear and demean the character of Mr. Bold. Mr. Bold claims to be fighting for justice on behalf of the poor and the sick tenants of the hospital, but what we really see is his own vanity-laced spirit of reform that drives him on. He is filled with his own ego of self-righteousness. The good relationship between Mr. Harding and Mr. Bold eventually withers away because of this. Eleanor is caught up in the storm, as she does love John Bold, but loves her father even more. In 2 touching scenes between her and the Jacobin masquerading as a reformer, she informs him that she will always side with her father and implores him to drop the court case against her father if Mr. Bold really loved her. But Mr. Bold, the sophist that he is, always conjures up excuses and deflections. He insists that he is not attacking Mr. Harding personally, but merely doing his public duty and serving the interest of justice. Mr. Bold insists, though the reader hardly buys it, that he holds no animosity toward Mr. Harding and merely wants to redress what he sees as negligence in taking an undisclosed but seemingly large income that could be, in Mr. Bold's eyes, though he has no actual experience, better used on hospital patients. As the battle between ancient institutions and their inheritances comes to the fore with zealous reformism, Mr. Bold enlists the media to support his cause. Trollope, for a 19th century man, seems like a 21st century person who predicted the rise of fake news and ideological-driven media machines that dominate our world. The Jupiter, the novel's stand-in for a liberal or reformist newspaper, gleefully joins the battle and publishes article after article denouncing Mr. Harding and the Church of England, even if there isn't any truth to what is being said. When Mr. Harding conferences with Archdeacon Grantley, who is married to Mr. Harding's other daughter, he presciently says, "And does not everyone know that the Jupiter would take up any case of the kind, right or wrong, false or true, with known justice or known injustice, if by doing so it can further its own views?" Trollope rightly states that even though the media pretends to be the arbiter of objectivity, it is ultimately governed by its own interests and will always act to further its own interests. Only idiots believe the media is objective. Here, Trollope reveals to us the insightful reality of the media that we have forgotten. The media doesn't care about truth or facts. The media only seeks to advance whatever agenda it has. And this has always been the role of the media. Those who opine for some neutral or objective media seem to forget that there never has been such a media in the history of human civilization. In fact, the first newspapers were established by political parties and their benefactors. Their intent was not so much to report on events as it was to report on events with the intent to sway public opinion. And sway public opinion the Jupiter does over the course of the novel. Tom Towers, the editor of the newspaper, fancies himself the most powerful man in Europe, precisely because he can sway the opinion of the masses based on something that comes out of his newspaper. Towers attacks Harding personally, something that Mr. Bold, if we're going to be fair here, hasn't exactly done, strictly speaking. The viciousness of the personal assaults on Mr. Harding may be cruel and untrue, but as Dr. Grantley correctly stated, it matters not, since the intent of the Jupiter is not truth, but the advancement of its own reformist agenda. The new middle-class media aligns with the middle-class radicals who hold the old ancient gentry and their institutions in contempt. And frankly, as is being revealed in Trollope's story, the middle class simply wants to steal the wealth, whatever wealth is left, of the land-owning ancient classes. To make matters even worse, Mr. Popular Sentiment, the novel's in situ popular novelist, who is in fact Charles Dickens, has also just written a new novel taking the Barchester Hospital affair as its foundation. The almshouse, which Mr. Bold reads when he begins to have misgivings about his own actions toward Mr. Harding, helps reinforce the image that the Jupiter has been promoting. The evil clerical clergyman of the novel, meant to be Mr. Harding, is a priggish and haughty individual, swimming in wealth while the poor hospital patients wallow away in misery. in describing how Mr. Popular Sentiment is so popular and powerful, and how he has always destroyed whatever institutions his novels set their sight against, Trollope informs us through Mr. Bold it is because of his portrayal of the rich and powerful as evil and cruel, and portrayal of the poor as good and thoroughly so, that Mr. Bold is horrified by what he reads, but still concludes, at least it makes no direct mention of Mr. Harding, which eases his conscience over the matter, even though this novel by the Popular Sentiment is nothing but lies. Yet lies is what moves the masses. Lies is what gains popular sentiment. Media manipulation is something that Trollope is very much aware of and critiquing within the pages of his novel, even if he's doing so through irony and satire. Truth? The truth doesn't matter to the media. Does not everyone know that the media would take up any case of the kind, right or wrong, false or true, with known justice or known injustice, if by doing so it could further its own views? Everybody should underline those lines when reading the novel. The constant media attacks eventually take their toll on Mr. Harding. When Elinor implores Mr. Bold to stop and leave her father in peace, the zealous doctor, the sophist that he is, says that it is now out of his hands, and that he himself is not the one attacking Mr. Harding. It is as if he has now become Pontius Pilate, washing his hand clean of any wrongdoing. Mr. Bold wishes to be completely free from the deteriorating health and well-being of the father of the woman he loves. He refuses to take any responsibility for Mr. Harding's ill health. Revolution has come to Little England in the guise of reform, and the man aptly named Bold, who claims that his zealous destruction of ancient establishments in the name of public justice is always good. Yet Mr. Bold is superseded as the engine of revolution. He unleashed the media, and now the media cannot stop when he wants to stop. The mob has now been unleashed thanks to Mr. Bold's initial posturing and zealous fervor for change. And once the individual revolutionary is overtaken, superseded by the media, the real revolution begins. The wisdom and profundity of the Warden is how it handles and details the ever-present realities of media manipulation, social justice warriors, and the destruction of tranquility that this maelstrom, this revolution brings. But Mr. Harding endures like Christ. He insists to Elinor that Mr. Bold means him no harm, and that their love should not suffer because of these new circumstances. Mr. Harding teaches that love is more important than politics. Mr. Harding teaches that love truly trumps hate. Yet more and more people are like Mr. Bold, and fewer are like Mr. Harding. This would startle Trollope, if he were alive, today, for Trollope is trying to teach us, through this story, that we should be more like Mr. Harding and less like Mr. Bold, even though today's media is telling us we should be less like Mr. Harding and more like Mr. Bold. Anthony Trollope's novel is as every bit important today as when it was written. Trollope reveals the nature of whom we now call social justice warriors. Mr. Bold is an SJW, or in Trollope's own words, he is a revolutionary who masks his revolutionary intent under the name of reform. Trollope reveals the true spirit of the media and the venom it spews. Moreover, he also reveals how the media is driven by ideology and isn't concerned with character assassination, irrespective of how much damage it does, because it can always claim it is doing so in the name of a greater cause, even though character assassination is exactly what the media is doing. Trollope also reveals the tragedy of ancient institutions, which do so much good, but when threatened become reactionary and concerned with only maintaining its power instead of fulfilling its public and humanitarian duty. The road to destruction is often paved with good intentions, however ignorant or naive the accompanying spirit is. In the end, Mr. Bold does drop his suit against Mr. Harding, Barchester Cathedral, and Hiram Hospital. John Bold's love for Eleanor and Mr. Harding's gentle kindness overcome the zealous fire that Mr. Bold had come to Barchester with. Indeed, his ways are changed after marriage to Eleanor. Marriage saved Mr. Bold and gave his life the meaning he sought through tearing down or reforming ancient institutions and their supposed injustices. The damage, however, cannot be undone. Mr. Harding resigns, and the hospital, which flourished under his stewardship, falls into ruin, thus fulfilling Tom Towers' response to Mr. Bold, when the young, overzealous surgeon informs the powerful newspaper editor he is dropping the suit. "The fire has gone too far," he says, "to be quenched." And that is true. The hospital, which was doing so much good, has been destroyed, thanks to Mr. Bold, but thanks especially to Tom Towers and the media. Peace returns, at least temporarily, to Barchester. Mr. Harding is able to walk the streets again with his pleasant smile. But the fire of revolution has already brought forth its destruction. In this sad and tragic tale of Old England being passed over by the zeal of modernity and the fire that it brings, Trollope details for us the issues that are still paramount today: overzealous reform and its destructive side, media manipulation, the ramifications of false public attacks on personal and private individuals. There is nothing new under the sun at Barchester Towers, after all.